The shotgun blast kind of take away from it. Hi folks, how's it going today? This is Bear here for Bear Trout Backcountry once again. Thank you for tuning in. We are spending the afternoon here in beautiful Three Rivers Wild Forest, not too far from Syracuse. And what I thought we'd do today is we'll take a little bit of a scout around, and we're going to check out maybe 5, 6, something like that, different species of trees that are really useful to a woodsman, really useful in the world of bushcraft. I consider myself a really good student of tree identification, and it's definitely something that I've become more and more passionate in as I've continued my homework and study and woodsman life and bushcraft. So this might be a multi-day thing, but I figure while we're here today we can try to see what we can find, and I'll give how to identify the different trees and their uses, and we'll figure it out together as we go along. Stay tuned. Alright, what we have here is an eastern white pine, conifer tree, and it may look like many other different kinds of pines, but the best and pretty much one of the easiest ways to identify a white pine is if you come right in here, you pull off one of these follicles from one of the twigs. So I have one clean follicle. There will always be 5 needles connected to each follicle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, always, with a white pine. White pines look a lot like red pines, which have big, longer, kind of palmated needles like this, but red pines are only going to have 2 per follicle. White pine is the only one in this area that has 5 per follicle, and I don't actually know that follicle is the right term, but that's what I think that gets the point across well enough. So you can see we actually have several different white pines. These have all been planted. This is a forest preserve, so they're very readily available. So for white pines, as far as uses go, you can take these needles, pull them right off, put these right in your bush pot over the fire and get them up to a boil. And pine needle tea is one of the most vitamin C rich substances that you can possibly have in the bush. There's more vitamin C in a cup of pine needle tea than like 5 lemons or some crazy statistic. So you need vitamin C boost in the morning. You're out on a camp or whatever, you're feeling a little laggy or phlegmy in the morning, try to find these long white pine needles, grab a handful of them, put them in your cup, get them up to a boil, and they pretty much taste like pine smells. They'll have that kind of piney, semi-turpentine-y kind of taste to it, but it's really soothing and really relaxing. I've done it a few times. They're actually pulled off a piece. If you can find the young eastern white pines will have this kind of smooth bark to it, but this bark, if you feel it, it will just be full of pitch and sap. That's especially if you let it dry out for a little bit, it becomes more and more sticky. So what you can do is you can actually rip a piece off. If you got a cut or something on your hands, I've actually let this air dry for about 5 minutes and it's already almost too dried out now, but you can rip it off and immediately you can wrap it around your finger like that and kind of hold it there for a few seconds, and it'll actually want to stick to it. The sap that you can find on the inside of the inner bark has really strong antiseptic qualities. So it's really good for the short term. If you cut yourself, it's a really good sealant for, you know, small cuts and small lacerations. So you can wrap it around an appendage or wherever on your arm, and then you can just wrap it with duct tape to make sure it stays on, or whatever you got to do. Wrap it in a cotton bandana or something like that. But it's pretty much nature's bandage. If you can find a young one, it's really good thing to be able to use. So antiseptic qualities, it's kind of medicinal qualities in its tea. The white pines, really good for fire kindling when you're at the kindling stage, or the small pieces can even be good tender depending on your fire method. You know, it's a pine, a resiny pine, burns really hot really fast. On an older tree like this, a lot of times you'll be able to look at some of the deep ridges in the bark, and some white pines are usually, this is a pretty healthy one, but a lot of times they'll just be bleeding sap, and you'll be able to see the white stains going down the ridges, and it'll, in those hard clusters where the sap will dry out and cluster up on the outside of the bark, you can harvest those clumps. That's like instant fire accelerant. Works really well. It will readily take a spark from a ferrocene rod or a lighter, a match, or whatever. So fire starting, antiseptic qualities, medicinal use. It's really good. Hot, fast. You know, you're not going to have a fire all night with it, but it's really hot, fast burning like any conifer. So white pine, eastern white pine with 5 needles per follicle. Really useful tree if you come across. Full spectrum of uses. So what we have here is a really good specimen of that goopy sap I was talking about, and you can literally just flake off some of this, and it's kind of hard, kind of sticky, but this stuff, you can literally rub this right on a wound and it'll seal it up really good. Like I said, antiseptic qualities to it, and obviously sticky substance like this is kind of a pine glue or a pine epoxy. This can be really good for doing some kinds of different repairs out in the bush. This is where the beginning stages of boiling up a pine tar would start here. Many uses of that too, but this, it's hard to say what this wound's from. It looks like something ran into it, but I'm not sure what that would be. All right, what we got here is a beech tree. Large football-like toothed leaves, usually in pairs of 3 and 4. When you follow the twig, they're usually be in clumps of 3 or 4, sometimes 2 apparently. Usually 3 is almost a dead giveaway, but besides that, they'll always have completely smooth bark at all stages of their growth. They'll always be just tight, smooth bark. Sometimes it'll have a little bit of a greenish gray tint. And in the winter, they're really easy to identify because the leaves turn brown and stay on. So you'll be out in the woods and everything will be completely white, and then there'll be brownish gold leaves just hanging on a tree. That is a beech tree. Very easy to identify in the winter. And I bring up beech tree because this is an incredibly hard, really hard wood. Really good for shelter constructions. Really good for making components of a bow drill, i.e. the bow itself. If you can find a curved branch, it's really hard, very unflexible. And you know, it's just a really good hardwood, so it'll have a long burning, it'll be a long burning fuel for your fire. But beech tree, just about some of the hardest woods in the Northeast that you can find. All right, folks. Continuing on with our tree identification, out here scouting around on a beautiful Sunday morning. we have a beautiful specimen of a very identifiable and very classic willow tree. Willows generally need moist soil to grow, so I believe it's the runoff, all the water runoff from this parking lot makes the soil moist enough. So these green twigs of the willow tree, if you were to break this off and chew on it, you just chew the end for 20-30 seconds, a minute, however. These green twigs contain a chemical called salicin, which is very similar to aspirin, and it's a really good anti-inflammatory, pain reliever of sorts. Really good find. Pretty much all variety of willow trees will have these green twigs. Again, pretty much all willow trees have these long, pointy, lance-shaped leaves. Black willow and weeping willow, like we have here, are the most prevalent in upstate New York. Again, they like really moist soil. So this is kind of an odd spot for this tree to be growing, but I saw it and it looked so beautiful, I figured I'd include this in our tree ID video. The branches and bark of a willow make really good softwood material for a bow drill set. Both the spindle and hearthboard can be harvested from willow pith. It's a really soft wood. Sometimes in the spring the bark will peel off and you can use the inner bark to make pretty decent cordage for a variety of uses. I myself haven't done that, but I have used the green twigs as aspirin-like pain reliever, and on several occasions I have used the black willow as a bow and drill set for starting a fire. So again, very good woodsman tool, the willow tree. Alright guys, so what we have here, fairly recognizable tree to most of y'all. It's this is a white paper birch. Dead giveaway is you know, the bark that just peels right off. This has actually been picked over a little bit, it looks like, so it's not as peely, but if you go about 10 feet up above me, I mean, it looks like you could just blow on it and it would fall apart. As most of you probably already know, these ripped off strips of the paper birch bark is one of the best fire tinder sources that is found naturally in the wilderness. Very oily and resinous. It takes a spark from a ferrocerium rod incredibly well. 1 or 2 direct strikes and you definitely got a nice glowing flame. This is a really good find. For that, it can be even damp. Bark can be damp and it will still, the oil and resins will still light. It can also be tapped. It has a drinkable sap, kind of a semi-sweet drinkable sap that doesn't need any purification. You can just drink it straight from the tree. About the time most trees sap, early, very early summer, early spring, summer. When most of the trees are running. You can put a cup, make a little wooden tap, pound it into the tree about 1 inch or 2, and collect it into a cup with a cloth over it, and then any big pieces of sediment will collect on the top of the cloth, and you'll be left with a nice cup of drinkable sap. That's just kind of like a sweet water substance that is actually full of vitamins and nutrients. So in an emergency situation, given the time of year, the birch tree is definitely a multifaceted tree to find. So always try to keep your eye out. All birches are generally the same and have the same qualities. There's yellow birch, river birch, and the paper birch that all grow in upstate New York, and they all generally have the same qualities. Um, River birch likes obviously to grow in moister soils. They all pretty much like moist soils, but um, white paper birch and yellow birch can be found in any kind of temperate forests in upstate New York and can be found very far inland. But the birch tree, an excellent woodsman tool if you find one, and definitely one of my favorite trees. And I really don't know if you could tell or not, but we talked about the bark being very identifiable on the birch tree, obviously, and you can't really see clearly on the camera, but birch leaves are kind of a pointy football shape with a point at either end. So if you see kind of a football shaped leaf with the combo of this peely bark, those are going to be your the two characteristics you need to identify this as a paper birch. Also, I guess while I got you, you'll see there's horizontal ridges in the bark. Pin cherry will also have a peely bark with horizontal ridges in it too. And that's probably the next in line as far as bark that will readily take a Ferrocerium rod spark and be a very good tinder source for you. So the birch tree, they all have pointy football shaped leaves about 2 to 3 inches and peely bark. Well, good morning folks. Here we are camped out. We're in the tail end of finishing up this Northeastern Woodlands tree ID video, and I was camped out here for the night. Don't mind the crackling of my campfire. It's just about died out. But we got a couple more trees that I wanted to get in this video that I think are important for a woodsman, outdoors enthusiast in the upstate New York and northeastern woodland area to know. Something else that is readily available and has many uses: the cedar tree. Now there is probably 4 or 5, 6, half a dozen or so different subgroups of cedar trees that grow in this area, but they all basically have very similar characteristics. Wherever you see cedar trees, they're pretty much all going to do the same thing. Cedar, very identifiable. It'll have a very brownish with deep pink and deep red tones. Very fibrous, scaly bark. Really good for making bird's nests. You can, rub this. You can see it's almost dusty. It's so dry. You can rub this up. It's a really, really fine fibers, and this will catch a spark from Ferrocerium rod fairly well. And bark is really useful. So stringy, tight but stringy, all at the same time kind of bark. And the even dead giveaway is it's an evergreen, obviously, so it'll have what they call needle-like but scaly needles. So they look very wide, but they're all very thin. If you get the end profile, thin, flat, scaly needles, they call them. And if you look at most of the tree identification books, different references, they'll all say cedar trees have scale-like needles. That's how they describe them. So most all cedar trees are going to have flat, non-pokey, you can grab them, they don't hurt, flat scale-like needles, and reddish, pink, brown, stringy bark. That's really good for starting a fire. Obviously, it's no secret that cedar is a really good construction wood. because of its resistance to rot and bugs. So if you find cedar, you want to build a primitive shelter, something possibly more long-term out in the woods, coming across cedar and milling out cedar by hand is also very easy for construction because it's an incredibly soft and very light wood, per how strong and long lasting it is. Really, really good construction wood. Lasts a really, really long time because, like I said, because of its resistance to rotten things. So, very light, fairly strong, very long lasting. Also, this is one of the best materials I have used, or I have found rather, that works really good for bow drill fires and primitive fire starting methods. I have tried several different kinds of woods for my hearth and spindle, hearthboard and spindle, for making various different bow drill sets, and I have found cedar on cedar for both the spindle and hearthboard is works the most easy for me. I've had the most rate of success. So again, cedar tree, you can find one. You can easily make a bow drill set out of cedar wood, and like I mentioned before, if you spend some time and rip down and process up some of the bark, you actually have your bird's nest right there. So this is the complete fire starting package. You can make your bow drill set and you can create your bird's nest to take the ember from your bow drill set and create fire. So this is a complete fire starting and shelter building package in this tree, and just a really multi-use, very efficient, effective tree that's readily available in the eastern woodlands. It likes, I've seen it actually grow. I can't really say for certain where it's going to grow, but I know for certain that it likes moist soil, or at least I've seen dozens and dozens of examples where it has thrived in moist soils. I can commonly find it around lake, pond, and river banks all over. That's actually when I'm building a bow drill set, I usually start my scouting for cedar wood along river banks. But right here, we're right in the middle of a forested area, and I have to assume maybe some of this has been planted. This is a planted forest management area that I'm camped out in, and was kind of shocked to find this out here. There's no really a water source around, fairly dry soil. Well, there's a little bit. I see there's a little bit of moss. There's a little bit of moss around, so maybe this area stays shady enough from the afternoon sun where this soil might stay a little bit more damp. But all in all, damp soils, I think the place to go. And usually shade is another good one. But I mean, they're a fairly hardy tree. I mean, you can see them. People plant them in their front yard, you know, just in the middle of the yard, and they'll thrive in sunlight all day. So I've seen them grow in pretty much every kind of situation. So in my opinion, they're a really hardy tree. They can pretty much be found anywhere. And keep your eye out for them. The cedar tree, a really good, useful tool for the woodsman. All right, folks, what we have here is a very young white oak tree. Another tree that's very plentiful in upstate New York. And oaks in general all have fairly similar characteristics, and I think they're pretty much all important to know about for a few reasons. But I think white oak is the king of the oak family, and very easily identifiable. Oak bark is very similar to sugar maple bark or hardwood maple. Very long horizontal ridges with curled sections. Usually the bark curls out to those ridges, kind of curls out to a point, and then there'll be a space. Kind of hard to explain. Problem is most oak trees all have very similar bark, and all of the oaks are very, very similar to all of the maples. So the easiest and pretty much the only way I can really quickly identify oak tree is by the leaf. Oak trees differ very much from maple leaves, so that'll be a dead giveaway. But this is a white oak leaf. You'll see that it'll usually have 6 to 7 lobed fins to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This actually has 8. Sometimes they're symmetrical, sometimes not. But there's usually always like 3 lobes to the side. And then you'll see this has got another little one poking out here. But they'll have like 6 fingers almost. But they call them lobes. Now, of course, there's scarlet oak, red oak, and probably 3 or 4 or more different kinds of oaks. There's a variety of oaks that grow in the northeastern woodlands. They're all going to have this general shape, but there's one other oak. There's a couple of other oaks that'll have these round lobes, and then scarlet oak and red oak are the other ones that are very, very that thrive in this area. And those will have lobes like this, but they'll all come to very sharp points. So they'll be, instead of this nice round, everything will be really harsh, jagged points coming out. And they'll usually, just like the white oak leaf, there'll be 6 points coming out to the side, and maybe, one big one at the crown. And there might be an extra one in there, but pretty much all oaks are going to have 3 fingers coming out of each side. White oaks and a few other oaks will be round, and then your red oaks and your scarlet oaks will be a little bit thinner. They'll the depressions of the lobes will come in closer to the mid vein and midrib, actually. Pardon me. And red oak and scarlet oaks, these will all come to harsh points. But I stumbled across this white oak at the campsite I was at, and figured I'd talk a little bit about it. So we have a white oak, a very young white oak. So I don't have any this time of year, but this will start producing acorns. So when you are able to find white oak acorns are a really good find, because they are preferred by small game as a food foraging source. They kind of have almost a sweeter taste, as opposed to all the other kinds of oaks have more of a bitter flavor to game animals. I've never eaten an acorn, but so most small game animals prefer acorns of a white oak. And so if you're in a camp situation, or more of a long-term camp, or a homesteading situation, and you're actually hunting your own game, for self-reliance, it's a good idea to put your tree stand up, or just keep your eye on where the white oaks are, because deer and squirrels and all kinds of game, rabbits, they all love to nibble at the white oak acorns. They're a very polarizing tree to game like that. So if that's the angle you're approaching, white oak is a very good thing to have on your property. or at least know where you can locate them. Second of all, with acorns, you can boil the acorn, and the tannic acid in the acorn will be boiled out at that point. So after you let that water cool, that post-boiled water will be full of tannic acid, which is very, very antibacterial, and can be used to dress wounds of all kinds, do a lot of different medicinal functions at that point. Also, so now you have a soft boiled acorn. Now the inner pith of that acorn, I'm not sure if pith is the right word, but the innards of that acorn can now be crushed up into a fine powder that can in turn be used as a type of flour, and you can actually make acorn bread right on the fire. I've never done that myself. I've seen videos of it being done. So again, the acorn, multi-use there in the fact that it is medicinal and edible. After, like I said, you have to boil the tannic acid out of it, and then you can actually the acorns are edible at that point, and you can make acorn bread with the powder from the crushed innards of the acorn. And also another big thing about the oak tree, which is no secret, oak wood is some of the most hardiest, strong construction wood that you can find. Really good for making axe handles and tool handles of all kinds. So again, if you're in a long-term camp situation or a homesteading situation, oak wood, really strong, reliable wood, has a very strong grain. Real good for all kinds of shelter building and all kinds of construction and tool handles. So again, really, really good uses there as far as construction. So again, the white oak tree and greaterly, all oak trees in general, medicinal, edible, and good for construction. Just the oak tree, very plentiful tree in upstate New York, and another really good source to find. Look for 6 lobes on the leaf. And the white oak trees, they can be monsters. They can be upwards of 120 feet. So they grow notoriously fairly straight. So again, if you're able to fall an oak tree and split it up, let it season for several months to a year, you're going to have a lot of really long usable lumber, or be able to hew out a lot of usable lumber from the oak tree. So the oak tree, another really good resource for a woodsman to know. And this would be an example of a red oak leaf with the spiked lobes. Can see that. Well, this is a young sapling. You see that with the three spike lobes on each side, but that's a red oak. And then the scarlet oaks will be a lot thinner than this. Another very prevalent tree in the eastern woodlands. All right, good evening, folks. We got some weather coming in, but I spotted another tree I want to get in this video that I wanted to take a second to talk about. I know the lighting is pretty weird right now. I'll try to get some other shots after my little speech here that'll show the bark and branches of this particular tree a little bit clearer. But what we have here is a hard maple or a sugar maple. Really plentiful, available, and recognizable tree in the eastern woodlands in upstate New York. Of course, hard maple has the classic Canadian flag maple leaf. Three large lobes with 2 little tails that come out on the bottom corners. Hopefully this is coming in. It's really windy. It's kind of difficult doing the camera work right here, but hopefully that's coming through nice and clear. We're in the fall season now, so it's a little bit slim pickings to find perfect leaf specimens, but you can Google maple leaf, and this is pretty much the classic image you're going to get. Maple leaves vary as far as leaves go to a pretty good degree, but there's usually always 3 big pointy lobes. Some of them don't have these little bottom points in the corners, but the maple leaves all have very similar characteristics. They have edible value, construction value, and of course, one of the big main things is very early summer, late winter, they'll start running sap. Very easy. You can, with your, even if you just have a knife, carve into the tree very neatly, like an inch or so. You could actually whittle a little tap. You could tap it in with the backside of your axe or knife if you have to. You can make a little channel, a little tap, and then you could just have your little metal container in your bushcraft kit or what have you, and you can actually run the sap right into that. I would put a bandana over the cup to protect it from sediment, but on a nice sunny early summer, late winter day, you could fill up several canteens of sap, which is high in vitamins and minerals, high in sugar, so you get a little quick energy burst, and it doesn't need any kind of purification. You can drink it right from the tree and have no fear of getting any kind of toxins or anything. It's maple sap is pretty much nature's energy drink. Really good source, really good find. There's several kinds of maple trees that grow in this area, and they all produce sap that is drinkable without any purification. So sap is a really good resource. Second of all, also a month or two later, after the sap is done running, you're getting to early to mid summer, the young leaves of the season, of the summer season of a maple tree are pretty tasty and edible. They have a slight sweeter taste. Like this leaf that's gone through the courses and is just fallen off in the fall season here is going to have a much harder to eat bitter taste, but if you can push through it, still has all the nutrients as the young leaves would. But the young leaves early in the summer season make really good salad greens, and they have just a kind of a little sweet taste to them. So the young leaves of a maple tree, good edible source. Of course, you all may know that all maple trees have the little helicopter winged seedlings. All maples produce these. If you carefully crack open this little case that the wing is connected to, you'll get, I know you can't see this on camera, but you'll get this little seed. I have no idea if that's coming in focus, but inside this little pouch you'll get the little seedling that is very edible. Again, you can just pop those just like you would peanuts or anything. You can just eat those straight, or you can mix those in with your young salad green leaves from the tree too. These are pretty much produced year round, and they're pretty much edible in all stages of the summer. That they'll start producing those seeds in the springtime. Also, really good thing to know about maple trees, it's a fairly strong wood. Good, decent wood for building shelters, that sort of thing. Also, I found that maple tree branches come in all sorts of different sizes and shapes and bends, and you'll find that it's really easy to make cooking utensils with the branches of a maple leaf because the branches do make all kinds of forks, and there's little twigs that grow every which way off of them. So it makes it really good for making makeshift spatulas, forks for cooking with, different, you know, if you need pieces, forked pieces to, you know, hold up a, make a sort of a tripod or some kind of a cooking beam and post for cooking over a fire. So different kinds of cooking and camp implements I find are really good. Maple tree is really good for that sort of thing. Again, because they're a fairly strong wood, pretty good dependable wood, strong grain, and the branches grow in so many different kinds of formations that they're rarely ever straight. You won't find too many cases where you'll find straight maple tree branches. So they're really good even if you need a bow for a bow and drill fire set. You could find that in a maple tree branch. So drinkable sap, edible leaves and seeds, and good construction wood and cooking implements make the maple tree, and pretty much all maple trees, all the species that grow in this area, are a really good multifaceted natural tree source for the woodsman, and that's why they make the list. So here we are trying to get you a little better idea of this sugar maple bark. Deep ridges, deep vertical ridges, and maple bark could be fairly hard to identify. As you can see, like I mentioned before, lots of bent and twisted branches, you know, a lot of really gnarled up mess of branches that can be really good for making forks. Case in point, this guy right here would make a really good type of skewer for a cooking implement. But yeah, maple trees are notorious for really gnarly, deep horizontal ridges. But once you start identifying the leaves of the tree, the bark will become second nature. So that's where I recommend starting the search, is in the leaves first.